A curious introduction. The kitchen smelled faintly of soap as the older plumber, a 62-year-old professional Sarah had only just met, packed up his tools. She leaned casually against the counter, watching him. Arthur Henderson, a man whose movements were as precise as the well-oiled gears of an antique clock, carefully placed a small, tarnished brass fitting into its velvet-lined compartment. The rhythmic clinking of metal on metal was the only sound for a moment, punctuated by the distant chirp of a robin outside the open window. When he wiped his hands on a clean, folded rag and announced, "That should do it, Miss Jenkins." "No more drips from the sink," Sarah smirked. Her emerald green eyes, bright with a mischievous glint, met his. "I think you missed a leak," she teased, pushing off the counter and taking a step closer. The scent of her floral perfume, a light lily of the valley, wafted towards him. Arthur, whose gaze usually lingered on the intricate workings of a pipe joint, found his eyes snagged by her direct stare. He frowned, a faint crease appearing between his bushy, salt and pepper eyebrows. "A leak?" he repeated, his voice a low rumble, tinged with genuine confusion. He glanced back at the newly tightened faucet, then down at the dry cabinet floor. Sarah's smile widened, revealing a flash of white teeth. "Yes," she affirmed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She edged a little nearer, her presence a sudden warmth in the otherwise cool kitchen. "I just turned 18 yesterday, Mr. Henderson. Perhaps you should check again." The wrench he was about to place in his toolbox slipped slightly in his grip, producing a soft thud against the bottom of the metal box. His usually placid features tightened, a blush creeping up his neck and dusting his cheeks. The silence that followed was no longer comfortable, it hummed with an unexpected, flirty tension, thick and palpable. Arthur's eyes, which usually held a deep, reflective calm, darted from her face to the floor, then to his toolbox, as if seeking an escape route. He cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. 18, he murmured, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. He bent quickly, retrieving the fallen wrench, his movements suddenly less precise, a touch clumsy. He avoided her gaze, focusing intensely on the task of securing his tools. A bead of sweat formed on his brow, despite the cool breeze drifting in. He snapped the latches on his toolbox with a decisive click, the sound echoing a little too loudly in the quiet room. "Is that all right, Mr. Henderson?" Sarah pressed, a playful lilt in her voice, enjoying his discomfort a little too much. She watched him, fascinated by the sudden rigidity in his posture, the way his shoulders seemed to hunch slightly, as if bracing for something. Perfectly fine, Miss Jenkins," he stammered, his usual professionalism cracking around the edges. He hoisted the heavy toolbox, its weight seemingly a comfort, a barrier. "The bill will be sent to your father, as usual." He took a step towards the back door, his retreat evident in every stiff movement. "Of course," Sarah said, a small sigh escaping her lips. He was clearly flustered, perhaps even a little frightened. The thrill of the chase, however brief, was exhilarating. She followed him to the threshold, watching as he fumbled with the latch. "You're very good at what you do, Mr. Henderson," she offered, a genuine compliment mixed with lingering flirtation. He paused, his hand on the doorknob, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes met again. This time, there was a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. Surprise? Resignation? Then, with a hurried nod and another mumbled "Good day, Miss Jenkins," he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. Sarah stood in the quiet kitchen, the faint scent of lilies still lingering in the air. A slow smile spread across her face. He had practically run. The encounter was brief, a little awkward, and certainly didn't end with a romantic flourish, but a sense of accomplishment settled over her. She had ruffled his feathers, provoked a reaction. It was a small victory, a delightful ripple in the calm surface of her ordinary day. The world, it seemed, was beginning to notice Sarah Jenkins. And she, in turn, was ready to notice it back. The feather and the thought. The morning light, usually a harsh intrusion, felt soft and almost conspiratorial as Sarah opened her front door. She'd slept surprisingly well, considering the previous evening's audacity, the memory of Mr. Henderson's flustered expression a delightful secret tucked away. Her gaze drifted downwards, not to the usual scattering of dust or an errant leaf, but to a startling splash of color against the faded welcome mat. There, nestled against the weathered wood, lay a single feather. It was unlike any she'd ever seen, a vibrant mosaic of emerald green and sapphire blue, tipped with a surprising fleck of gold, impossibly iridescent in the weak morning sun. It wasn't from a common robin or sparrow, that was for sure. This feather spoke of something exotic, something rare, something deliberate. A shiver of intrigue traced its way down her spine. A bird couldn't have just dropped it there, so perfectly placed. Her mind, ever eager for a puzzle, immediately leaped to the previous night. Mr. Henderson. Could it be? A subtle message, left by a man who, despite his initial shock, had held her gaze just a moment too long? The thought made her pulse quicken, a mischievous smile playing on her lips. It was exactly the kind of whimsical, intriguing gesture she'd secretly hoped for. Later that morning, the feather carefully tucked into her pocket, Sarah met Leo at their usual coffee spot, a worn leather booth that had witnessed countless of her dramatic recounting sessions. He raised an eyebrow, already sensing the impending tale. "You look like you just won the lottery, or perhaps, successfully charmed a dragon." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes sparkling. "Better. I charmed a plumber." She pulled out the feather, laying it dramatically on the table between them. "And I think he left me this." Leo picked it up, turning it over in his fingers, his expression a mixture of amusement and genuine curiosity. "That's quite the feather. Not exactly standard pigeon issue. So, tell me everything." The whole sordid, flirtatious saga. She recounted the encounter with relish, detailing the moment his wrench slipped, the charged silence, her own audacious words. He was so flustered, Leo. It was adorable. And then, this morning, this. She gestured to the feather. He must have been thinking about it all night, then came back and left it. Leo, ever the pragmatist, tilted his head. Or, a very colorful bird happened to be flying by your doorstep at exactly the right moment. And you, my dear Sarah, are projecting all your romantic fantasies onto a 62-year-old man who just wanted to fix your sink. He flashed her a grin. "But I admit, it's a good story." "So, you're officially crushing on the plumber now? The one with the sensible work boots and the distinguished gray hair?" Sarah playfully swatted his arm. "Don't be a cynic. He was actually very handsome, in a rugged, experienced kind of way. And he definitely noticed me. This feather is proof." She picked up the iridescent plume, twirling it between her fingers. "It's like a secret code. A tiny, beautiful, mysterious message." Another drip, another call. The rhythmic plink 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 from the kitchen faucet, for Sarah, was the sweetest music. A full week had elapsed since Arthur Henderson's last house call, and the memory of his flustered expression, the near fumble of his wrench, still brought a mischievous curl to her lips. She'd meticulously filled the basin the previous night, letting the water settle, then, with an almost surgical precision, had nudged a minuscule connection beneath the sink. Just enough for a slow, persistent weep, a perfect mimicry of an aging, weary pipe. She was no licensed plumber, but she was a quick study, and her father's old toolbox had provided exactly the necessary implements. Another drip, another dispatch, she hummed, reaching for her phone. Thompson's Trusty Plumbing, the number now etched into her memory, rang once before the familiar, brisk voice answered. "Thompson's, B speaking." "Hi, B. It's Sarah Jenkins again, 123, Elm Street," Sarah chirped, lacing her voice with just the right amount of practiced exasperation. "My kitchen sink. It's weeping again. I swear, it's a conspiracy." A sigh, audible even through the phone line, preceded B's response. "Already? Good heavens, child. What is it with that sink? I know, right? It's driving me absolutely mad. Listen, B, if Mr. Henderson is available, could you send him? He was just here, he knows the setup, you know? It would save him the hassle of re-diagnosing everything." Sarah held her breath, fingers tightly crossed. There was a pause, a rustling sound like shuffling papers. "Mr. Henderson, eh?" "Well, he just returned from a tricky boiler job. He's a bit entangled in paperwork at the moment." "Oh, please, be. He was so incredibly thorough last time. I just feel like he'd be the best one to truly unearth the root of this persistent problem," Sarah insisted, laying it on thick. She could almost envision Bee squinting at the appointment book. All right, Miss Jenkins. I'll see what I can manage. He does have a full afternoon, but I suppose a quick checkup for a repeat customer isn't the end of the world." A hint of amusement now laced Bee's voice, a knowing quality that made Sarah wonder if her ploy was quite as opaque as she'd imagined. "He'll be there within the hour." Sarah practically bounced as she disconnected the call. Yes. Phase 2, accomplished. She scanned her modest kitchen, suddenly perceiving it through Arthur's gaze. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating a dance of dust motes in the air. The counter gleamed, save for a small vase of freshly cut daisies she'd acquired that morning, a subtle homage to his quiet appreciation for blooms. She swiftly exchanged her faded t-shirt for a soft, form-fitting sweater, tugging at the hem to ensure its perfect drape. A swift application of lip gloss, a final check in the mirror, and she was poised. A little tune hummed beneath her breath, a nervous energy thrumming just beneath her skin. This time, she wouldn't be caught unprepared. This time, the initiative was entirely hers. Lemonade and forget-me-nots. The doorbell chimed, a polite, almost apologetic sound. Sarah, humming a nameless tune, pulled open the door. Mr. Henderson stood on her porch, a fresh floral shirt replacing his worn work uniform, his silver hair neatly combed. He held a small, neatly wrapped package, his gaze darting between it and Sarah's face. A blush bloomed on his cheeks, stark against his weathered skin. He looked, for all the world, like a schoolboy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Mr. Henderson," Sarah greeted, a playful lilt in her voice. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this, unexpected, yet not entirely unwelcome, visit?" He cleared his throat, his eyes still skittering away from hers. "Miss Jenkins." "Sarah. I was in the neighborhood. And I thought perhaps I'd drop off something." He held out the package, a small box tied with a thin, almost invisible ribbon. "Oh?" Sarah arched an eyebrow, a smile playing on her lips. "Something for me?" She stepped aside. "Come in, Mr. Henderson. It's a bit warm out there." He shuffled inside, his movements stiffer than before. The air in the living room, usually so open, seemed to constrict around him. No, I shouldn't stay. Just wanted to drop this off." Sarah, however, had other plans. "Nonsense. I just made a fresh batch of lemonade. It's ice cold and precisely what you need after being in the neighborhood on such a warm day." Without waiting for a response, she disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with 2 tall glasses, condensation beading on the sides, and a pitcher of pale yellow liquid. The citrusy aroma cut through the lingering scent of old wood and dust. She handed him a glass. His fingers, calloused from years of work, brushed hers, a fleeting touch that made him flinch slightly. He took a long, grateful sip. The tartness of the lemon and the sweetness of the sugar seemed to visibly relax him. "Much better, isn't it?" Sarah asked, settling onto the sofa opposite him. "So, what brings you to my humble abode, truly?" She gestured to the package still clutched in his hand. He put down his glass, a flicker of his earlier discomfort returning. "It's a small thank you for your kindness the other day." He paused, then hurried on, "And I wanted to ask about your rosebush. The one by the gate. Is it a hybrid tea?" The leaves looked a bit like peace, but the buds were still too tight to tell. Sarah grinned, amused by his sudden pivot to horticulture. "Oh, that old thing? It was here when I moved in. I think it's just a standard red rose, nothing fancy. But you clearly know your flowers." His eyes lit up then, the nervousness fading. "Gardening is a passion of mine." My garden is my sanctuary. I have everything from sprawling hydrangeas to delicate primroses. And a rather robust patch of delphiniums. They always remind me of the sky on a summer's day. He spoke with an unexpected eloquence, his hands unconsciously mimicking the planting of seeds, the tending of leaves. Sounds beautiful, Sarah mused, genuinely intrigued by this new facet of the reserved plumber. Do you have any forget-me-nots? A strange, soft smile touched his lips. Ah, forget-me-nots. Yes, I do. Tiny blue blossoms, like specks of the purest sky, clustered together. They're rather unassuming, but they have a quiet resilience. And a lovely meaning, of course. He looked directly at her then, his gaze steady, a warmth entering his eyes that hadn't been there before. They remind me of someone. Someone who, despite being small and perhaps a bit mischievous, leaves a lasting impression. Someone you definitely wouldn't forget. A pressed promise. The kitchen faucet's persistent drip had finally silenced. Mr. Henderson, his motions precise and efficient, polished the last bit of porcelain with a fresh cloth before carefully returning his tools to their worn leather satchel. The low thrum of the refrigerator now filled the space once occupied by clanking and scraping. Sarah, observing from her perch on a counter stool, swung her legs idly. All done, Miss Jenkins, he announced, his voice a quiet resonance, stripped of its earlier playful lilt. He straightened to his full height, his gaze meeting hers with a steady, professional focus. Sarah's usual quick retort caught in her throat. Something in his bearing had subtly shifted, becoming softer, less guarded. He reached into the breast pocket of his work shirt, drawing out a small, meticulously folded square of tissue paper. With surprising delicacy, he unfurled it, revealing a tiny, deep blue blossom, perfectly pressed and impossibly delicate. Its petals, no larger than her thumbnail, held the vibrant hue of a summer sky. A forget-me-not, he murmured, extending it. Found it earlier, by your porch steps. Thought you might appreciate it. Sarah's breath hitched. Her earlier flirtatious banter suddenly felt childish, a clumsy attempt to provoke. This quiet, unexpected gesture resonated far deeper. She slid from the stool, her movements abruptly hesitant. As she reached for the fragile bloom, her fingers brushed his. The contact was fleeting, a whisper of warmth, but it sent a surprising jolt through her. His hand, calloused and strong, cradled the tiny flower with such tenderness. Her eyes, usually dancing with mischief, were wide and unblinking as she accepted the blossom. The paper felt like silk, the flower itself almost weightless. She gazed at it, then up at him, a kaleidoscope of emotions swirling within her. This wasn't merely a plumber completing a job. This wasn't a casual compliment or a playful response to her teasing. This was something profound, a silent offering that spoke volumes. The forget-me-not, a poignant symbol of remembrance, felt like a secret shared, a promise pressed between them. The professional distance that had defined their interaction moments before had evaporated, replaced by a palpable intimacy. A blush crept up Sarah's neck, not from embarrassment, but from a sudden, overwhelming awareness of him, of them. His earlier quietness, his observant nature, suddenly clicked into place. He hadn't just fixed her sink, he had truly seen her, responding with a gesture that transcended their brief acquaintance. The kitchen air, once scented with pipe sealant, now seemed to carry the faint, sweet perfume of unspoken feelings. She clutched the tiny flower, a fragile, vibrant testament to a moment she knew she would not soon forget. The pattern of calls. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled Sarah's kitchen as she held the phone to her ear, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Yes, hello, plumb perfect, she chirped. I seem to have a rather peculiar gurgling sound coming from my guest bathroom sink. It's intermittent, but quite alarming. Brenda's weary sigh was almost audible through the receiver. Is this Ms. Jenkins again? She asked, a knowing edge to her voice. It is. And I'm truly stumped. It only happens when I hum Bohemian Rhapsody in a minor key. Brenda paused, then, with a sigh that could fell a small tree, said, All right, Ms. Jenkins. We'll send someone out. Mr. Henderson should be free this afternoon. Sarah suppressed a triumphant grin. Weeks bled into a pattern. A drip from the laundry room faucet, a faint, almost imperceptible whistle from the toilet tank, a kitchen sink drain that sounded suspiciously like a cat clearing its throat. Each time, the call to Plum Perfect ended with Brenda's dry, "Mr. Henderson will be there." Brenda, seated at her perpetually tidy desk, observed the evolving ritual. She'd raise an eyebrow as she scribbled "Jenkins," gurgling on the dispatch slip, then glance at Arthur, who would simply nod, a faint, almost imperceptible blush dusting his ears. "Seems you've become quite the regular at the Jenkins residence, Arthur," she'd remark, her tone laced with a knowing amusement. Arthur would merely clear his throat, adjust his spectacles, and head out, his toolbox clanking a familiar rhythm. Their encounters, initially steeped in the polite formality of service, began to unfurl into something more. The first gurgle visit, Arthur had remained focused on the U-bend, offering succinct diagnoses. The second, a faucet wail, saw them discussing the peculiar beauty of moss growing on old brickwork. By the third, a phantom pipe rattle, Sarah was offering him homemade lemonade, and they were debating the merits of various perennial flowers, his quiet passion for horticulture slowly blooming into conversation. He'd find himself lingering a moment longer, explaining the intricacies of water pressure or the subtle art of sealant application, his voice softer, less purely professional. Sarah, for her part, found herself anticipating his visits with an almost childlike glee, her day brightened by the prospect of his gentle presence and earnest explanations. One sunny Tuesday, after Arthur had meticulously tightened a perfectly functional showerhead, Sarah leaned against the doorframe, a playful smile on her lips. "You know, Mr. Henderson," she began, "I think I might be running out of plumbing emergencies." Arthur, wiping his hands with a cloth, met her gaze, a small, genuine smile finally gracing his lips. "Perhaps," he said, his voice a low rumble, "the pipes in your home have simply decided to behave themselves." The quiet understanding that hung between them, unspoken but palpable, was more potent than any fabricated leak. Brenda's voice, a few minutes later, crackled through Arthur's radio. "Arthur, you still at the Jenkins place? Got another call coming in, but, well, never mind. Just wanted to check in." Arthur chuckled, a rare, soft sound. "All well, Brenda. Just finishing up." He packed his tools, a newfound lightness in his movements. "Coffee and confessions." The persistent drip from beneath the kitchen sink had, once again, surrendered to Mr. Henderson's expertise. He meticulously tightened the last nut, his movements precise and economical. Sarah watched him from the doorway, a playful glint in her eye. He straightened, wiping his hands on a pristine rag, and turned to her. "That should hold it," he stated, his voice a low rumble. Sarah pushed off the doorframe, a smile spreading across her face. "It always does." A comfortable silence settled between them, different from the initial, charged quiet of their first meeting. This one felt earned. He cleared his throat, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of something resembling nerves in his usually composed demeanor. "Miss Jenkins," he began, his gaze steady, "I was wondering if you might consider joining me for a coffee sometime?" The question hung in the air, a delicate offering. Sarah's smile widened, a burst of genuine delight. "I'd love to, Mr. Henderson." Her enthusiasm was palpable, her voice a little brighter than usual. "How about now? My afternoon's free." A subtle warmth touched his eyes. Now would be perfect. They found themselves at a small, independent cafe tucked away on a leafy side street, the scent of roasted beans and warm pastries embracing them as they stepped inside. Sunlight streamed through the large front windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Sarah chose a table by the window, and Mr. Henderson, with a quiet nod, pulled out her chair before settling into his own. He ordered a black coffee, she a caramel latte with extra foam. As they waited, Sarah found herself effortlessly chatting, recounting a humorous anecdote about a disastrous attempt at baking bread. Mr. Henderson listened, a soft smile playing on his lips, occasionally interjecting with a thoughtful question or a quiet observation. Their drinks arrived, and Sarah took a sip of her sweet, creamy concoction. "This is lovely," she mused, gazing out at the passers-by. "It's nice to just sit." "Indeed," he agreed, stirring his coffee. "Life moves at such a pace these days." They talked about everything and nothing, the changing seasons, a quirky local art exhibit, even the intricacies of plumbing, which Sarah found surprisingly engaging when explained by him. He spoke of the satisfaction of a job well done, of the quiet dignity in working with one's hands. Sarah, in turn, shared her aspirations, her desire to travel, to experience the world beyond the familiar confines of her small town. Laughter bubbled up between them, light and genuine. Sarah realized, with a pleasant jolt, how easily they conversed, how comfortable she felt in his presence. There was no pretense, no awkward pauses, just a flowing exchange of thoughts and feelings. It was more than just a pleasant outing, it was a connection, deep and undeniable, blossoming beyond the initial spark of their encounters. She found herself watching his hands as he gestured, the lines etched by years of honest labor, and a warmth spread through her chest. This wasn't just a friendly chat, this was something real, something she hadn't anticipated but now fiercely cherished. The afternoon sunlight began to wane, casting long shadows across the cafe floor, but neither of them seemed eager to end their shared moment. No more leaks, just calls. The latte art, once a delicate swirl, had long since dissolved into the milky depths of Sarah's mug. Across the small, wrought iron table, Mr. Henderson's empty espresso cup sat like a forgotten sentinel. The afternoon light, which had earlier painted the cafe in warm hues, now stretched into long, amber fingers, signaling the approach of dusk. A cool breeze, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke, ghosted through the open door, making the potted ferns on the patio shiver. Sarah, leaning forward slightly, watched the subtle play of light and shadow on Mr. Henderson's face. He was observing the street, a thoughtful, almost distant expression on his features. The easy hum of conversation had quieted, replaced by the gentle clatter of dishes from inside the cafe and the distant drone of city traffic. She felt a comfortable stillness settle between them, a pleasant counterpoint to her own usual restlessness. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned his gaze back to her. His eyes, usually so focused and professional, held a new, softer warmth. Without a word, he reached across the table, his hand covering hers where it rested beside her mug. His touch was gentle, unexpected, yet it sent a surprising jolt through her. Her breath hitched, and she felt a blush creep up her neck, a sensation she hadn't anticipated. He didn't squeeze or grip, it was more a quiet claiming, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken current between them. His thumb brushed lightly against her knuckles, a feather-light caress that spoke volumes. The setting sun caught the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, deepening them, giving his usually composed face an almost vulnerable quality. "You know," he began, his voice a low rumble, a little huskier than usual, "I think we've taken care of all the leaks, at least for a while." A small, playful smile tugged at the corner of his lips, a rare sight that made her heart flutter. "No more urgent plumbing issues, I imagine." He paused, his gaze searching hers, a hint of genuine uncertainty in their depths. "But," he continued, his thumb tracing a slow circle on the back of her hand, I wouldn't mind if you still called. Even without a dripping faucet or a clogged drain." Sarah's heart, which had been steadily thrumming, now seemed to surge, overflowing with a warmth that spread through her chest. The honesty in his voice, the simple, direct request, resonated deeply. It wasn't about a repair job anymore, or a playful flirtation, it was about connection, about them. The world outside the cafe seemed to fade, leaving only the soft golden light, the gentle pressure of his hand, and the quiet understanding passing between them. A genuine, unbidden smile bloomed on her face. She met his gaze, her own eyes shining with a mixture of delight and profound relief. In response, she squeezed his hand, a firm, affectionate gesture that conveyed everything she felt without needing words. The world felt suddenly brighter, imbued with a new, exhilarating promise. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows, but in the cafe, surrounded by the lingering scent of coffee, a new kind of light had just begun to glow. A new beginning. The late afternoon sun dappled through the oak leaves, painting shifting patterns on the cobblestone path. Sarah laughed, a clear, unrestrained sound that made the pigeons rustle on a nearby bench. Arthur, walking beside her, offered a quiet smile. He wasn't in his work uniform, but a simple, well-ironed polo shirt and khakis, a stark contrast to the grease-stained overalls she usually associated with him. There was no leaky faucet to fix, no clogged drain to clear, just the gentle rhythm of their footsteps and the murmur of conversation. He pointed out a particularly vibrant rose bush, its petals unfurling in layers of deep crimson. "They remind me of the ones my grandmother grew," he mused, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Sarah found herself captivated not just by the flowers, but by the unexpected tenderness in his eyes. Later that week, at their usual coffee haunt, Leo nudged Sarah with his elbow, a grin playing on his lips. "So, still no plumbing emergencies at your place, huh, princess?" he teased, stirring his latte. "Or have you just perfected the art of creating them for your personal handyman?" Sarah rolled her eyes, but a faint blush crept up her neck. "He's not my handyman, Leo. We went for a walk. It was nice." She picked at a scone, suddenly feeling a little self-conscious under his knowing gaze. "A walk," Leo repeated, drawing out the word. "Right. And next, you'll be telling me you're discussing the optimal torque for a compression fitting over candlelight. Just be careful you don't spring any leaks of your own, love." He winked, then softened. "Seriously though, you look happy." "He's a good man, Arthur. A bit quiet for your usual type, but solid." Brenda, meanwhile, noticed the change in Arthur. He still arrived promptly, still worked diligently, but there was a subtle lightness to his step, a faint, almost imperceptible hum that used to be absent. He'd even started bringing in small, meticulously arranged bouquets of wildflowers from his garden, leaving them on the reception desk. For the office, he'd mumble, avoiding her gaze, but Brenda knew. She'd seen that particular brand of soft contentment before, usually on the faces of people who had recently discovered a quiet, unexpected joy. She simply nodded, a dry smile touching her lips. "Very thoughtful, Arthur." They brightened the place up. Sarah, back in her apartment, stared at the small, potted succulent Arthur had given her after their walk. It was resilient, unassuming, yet surprisingly lovely. She thought about his quiet observations, his gentle humor, and the unexpected warmth that bloomed between them. It was a connection she hadn't sought, a relationship that defied all her youthful expectations of grand gestures and dramatic declarations. Instead, it was built on shared silences, a mutual appreciation for simple beauty, and the quiet understanding that sometimes, the most profound beginnings are found in the most unassuming places. The plumbing was definitely fixed, but something far more significant had just begun to flow.